Okay, hello everybody and welcome to class on Wednesday, April 22nd, which is Earth Day. Happy Earth Day. So today we're going to talk about the second half of transitioning to green renewable energies. And here's the plan for today. I put that in there just to remind me to tell you Happy Earth Day. SUNY Potsdam's campus does have some events happening virtually. Not as fun as in-person events, but the Environmental Club did have a lot of great events planned for this week. So this is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, so hopefully we'll get to hold those activities next year on the 51st anniversary of the first Earth Day. So a few announcements before we get started. I sent you that email the other day with a couple class updates. I posted up here eval form for the poster project that you all did. So far, only 2 people have responded to that. Now, you don't have to fill this form out, but you do have to be aware that if your peers respond unfavorably about you, then if I don't have anything from you, I can't hear your side of the story. So some of you might have had great experiences in your groups and then you just don't submit the forms, that's fine. But you have till next Friday, May 1st, because I add that grade to your poster grade. So I don't want to wait too long to get those grades to you. So I'm just giving you another week and a half to fill out those peer evals. Also, the Sustainable Technology Initiative presentation, your ideas for that were due Monday. I only got 7 people turning their ideas in. So 8 people still need to turn these in. Turn these in to me because then I can give you feedback on whether or not that's a good idea. So you need to turn in your idea to me and you need to sign up for a presentation date. So this is the first time you're hearing about this project. Go back and watch my videos from the past 2 classes. I explain the project in detail. Okay, so moving on, let's get into energy. So how can we make our energy system more sustainable? In the 3 ways that we emphasize in sustainability: socially, environmentally, and economically. So I made this little slide to kind of summarize what we talked about on Monday, which is that we have been using in the United States and globally mostly fossil fuels, right? That's oil, gas, and coal. And we need to transition away from these to renewable sources. And I put those top renewable sources on there. And those are biomass, hydroelectric, solar, wind, geothermal, and nuclear is not really renewable, but it's much cleaner than fossil fuels. And why do we have to do this? Just to be better people and make the environment better out of our moral imperative? That's part of it, but there's a very compelling economic motivation as well and physical limitation, which is that we're running out of fossil fuels. We talked about this on Monday, right? These are the predictions from British Petroleum, a fossil fuels company, about how many years left we have for each of these fossil fuels. So 114 years, that might sound fine, but 50 years doesn't sound great. You guys are all going to be alive then, right? When we run out of natural gas and coal. I might even be alive. So we needed another plan in place. And your book, the chapter that you read for today, proposed this idea of energy democracy as a model for, okay, as we transition to renewable energy sources, let's reframe the paradigm. Let's do it differently. Let's not just go from fossil fuels owned by a handful of global corporations who are extremely wealthy to renewables owned by a handful of global corporations who are extremely wealthy. Let's take this huge transition time to change the paradigm of how energy is managed. And so the quote from the book that they said is that energy democracy seeks to reframe energy from being a commodity that is commercially exploited to being a part of the commons, that is, a natural resource that everyone has a right to use and to help sustainably manage. So this is pretty pie in the sky sounding. And what I want to spend a couple slides talking about is that it's not as like untethered from reality as that maybe sounds. So I read through some of your CPSs and I saw that you guys had like some pushback to this idea, basically in the sense that you're saying, this sounds great, but that's not really possible. So I want to challenge you on that and think about it a little more. Because, so we've talked about this before, which of the energy sources lends itself more easily to a framework where it's shared between everyone? Well, not fossil fuels, because as we saw, they're unevenly distributed around the world, and control of those resources is like legally tied to companies that have the rights to extract them. So I want to point out some of the quotes from folks in the class from your CPSs reacting to this idea of energy democracy and is it possible? And so this person said, some energy resources are more ownable because you can physically possess them. Hydropower is more ownable because you can claim it's your property, similar to that of fossil fuels. Energy sources like solar are a lot more difficult to claim because you don't own the sun. The possession of resources doesn't have to be this way. However, people want to keep it this way because it benefits them and makes them money. Right, so it doesn't have to be that way, but it's going to be hard to buck the entire system of capitalism. And I really liked this response. It was really well written. So this says, I think the dream to make energy a natural resource and to not have it traded as a commodity is a very hopeful and positive goal to have. It can do a lot for people who is not as fortunate as us to be able to access it more readily. However, at the end of the day, producing energy makes money. Everything that goes into producing enough energy to power towns and states is acquired using companies that pay their workers and need to make money in order to do so. The ability for them to pay their workers comes from the fact that energy is traded as a commodity. Energy is also a very time-consuming and hard resource to maintain, and the ability for us to have enough people to fix and maintain it also lies in the fact that energy makes money. So this is totally true in an centralized energy system. So if everyone is relying on a handful of companies to provide their energy, there's definitely no way that we can just have this be a commodity. But I just want to show you a couple of examples that work for renewable energy where they do enable us to, so energy is always going to be bought and sold, right? Always. We're always going to have that as part of the system. But the way that we can transition into more of an energy democracy revolves around how we buy and sell it. So let me clarify that with an example. So let's look at this as a social justice issue. So we can look at it through the lens of solar power. Okay, we know solar energy is clean and renewable, but yeah, so why don't we just all have solar panels on our house? Well, they're expensive and you have to install them and you have to maintain them. In the long term, they will reduce your energy costs. They'll pay themselves off over time, especially if you live in a really sunny place. But so that doesn't matter if you don't have the money to install a solar panel in the first place. I would love to have solar panels on my roof, but I can't afford it. So there's just a statistic on this. So how many people are like me? Well, low and moderate income families make up 40% of the US population, but only 5% of rooftop solar owners. So if you look at this house here with the rooftop solar panels, yeah, that's a pretty nice house. The people who live in that house probably have more than a moderate income. So how do we do this? Do we have to stick with large companies being the only ones who can get the capital to invest in solar, and then obviously then they have to maintain their company and pay their workers, so we're tied into this model? There is another way. Community or decentralized solar. So what the heck is this? Basically, the way this works is so I took this off a site that's describing community solar. The way it works is like, let's look at this graphic over here. So not everyone can afford to install solar panels on their house, but some people do. They install solar panels on their house, they have enough money to, and then other people can subscribe to that community solar project. So you can just read it because it's clear. So community solar offers the benefit of solar to those who can't or don't want to install solar panels on their homes. They enable individuals, businesses, or organizations to purchase or lease a share in the community solar project. If you join a community solar project, you get a credit on your electric bill each month for the energy produced by your share. So what I want to point out to you on this little loop graphic over here is that the solar panel facility, it doesn't have to be a large company that owns it. It can be many different people with solar panels on their houses forming a cooperative that then other people also buy shares into. So, or it can be something like, oops, it's in the video. Or maybe it's not individual homeowners. Maybe it's an organization like a university. Put solar panels on their roofs and then they open it up to the community to also buy shares in it if it's producing more energy than the university can use. The video for today, the second video, is a video about a large church that is following this exact model. So this huge church put solar panels all over their roof, and then the church members, and they open it up to other community members, buy a share in it. And so they're getting cheaper, locally generated electricity, but they're still having, money to pay to pay for the installation and to pay for the maintenance of those solar panels. This model can also be followed with wind and hydro. You can have a community wind energy project where certain locations, it can be the town or it can be an organization or individual landowners who put up wind turbines and then have people buy shares. We have something similar happening with this new company, Northern Power and Light, up here in the North Country. So this is a guy and his two sons who are from this region and decided to basically invest in rebuilding a hydroelectric generation facility, a small one. And now they're selling shares in it. So I have a share in it. So my electricity part of my electricity comes from them. It's not all of my electricity, but they have dealt with the provider so that the provider, when I pay the provider for that portion of my electricity, that money goes to them. So this is possible. And if they scaled up their production, I could get all my energy from them. So these models are possible. And I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to skip through these slides for a second because I actually want to show you something. I want to show you because it leads really well into this idea that your book talked about, decentralized versus centralized energy systems. So look at these three things, this little graphic. You can see that a system, so what's the difference between these systems? This is a highly centralized system. Imagine this as a place where energy is generated in a coal-fired power plant and it's powering thousands of homes that exist over a huge region. Now in this less centralized system, we have several generators or power plants powering a little bit more distributed grid. And this over here is a completely decentralized or distributed grid where you have power plants, smaller, much smaller, but distributed more widely. Which of these systems do you think is more stable, even for things just like blackouts, right? Huge storms. The distributed one, the decentralized one, right? You take out one of those power plants, the whole region doesn't go down, just the region served by that small plant. So there's many benefits to decentralization that are just logistical benefits that don't have to do with green energy. So let me show you this with some more detail. That was a really basic model. But what this is showing is here's how we generate electricity now. We have a big power plant that runs on fossil fuels, on coal. And then that electricity is then only formed there, and it's distributed over a huge grid to factories and to homes and to businesses, right? But a better way to run the grid would be to have it more distributed. So you still have a power plant. Maybe this is just scaled down the amount of power it's contributing to the grid. But you have all these other places. You have rooftop photovoltaics on homes. You have wind farms. You have different storage places for hydrogen fuel cells, that is. So you have a distributed grid that's not only stronger because it's more resilient to any one piece going down, but it's also more, it facilitates renewables and community ownership of renewables more, right? And in some places we are moving towards this a little bit. Like in this region, we get a lot of our electricity from power plants, but we also get a lot of it from hydroelectricity all around the region. And we also get some of it from the wind farms that have gone up, and solar energy farms are going up in Canton next year. And there's one that Clarkson has in Potsdam now. So these decentralized systems are already starting to happen, and they lend themselves to this more democratic way of managing energy, right? This is just a more elaborate picture of that same thing, just showing, basically, you can read through this yourself, but it's basically showing like the smart grid, right? So the main problem we have with moving toward this more distributed energy system is the grid. Our grid is old and it's not smart. It doesn't have a lot of places along it to like store energy to be distributed later. It doesn't have good capacity for drawing energy from many different locations, because that's not what it was built for. It was built for a centralized energy system. So we're going to have to invest in the grid to get away from that. So I actually want to now go back to this. So how much are we going to have to invest in the grid? We're going to have to invest a lot. And it's kind of just like getting a solar panel for your house. You have to spend a lot up front, but over time it pays off in savings. Now, transitioning to renewables, so it will be expensive, but we're going to create millions of jobs and reduce our healthcare costs, because the impacts, especially on minority communities, which is usually where power plants, coal-fired power plants are located, and they tend to be located more commonly in communities of color. So the health impacts of those are unfairly borne by those communities. So health impacts will be reduced, climate change will be partially mitigated, and will generate more jobs doing it. So the transition to green energy isn't something that's like a tree hugger, sacrifice for the earth type of movement. It's a smart economic investment, but it will hurt at first, because that grid has to be updated. And who's going to update it? It has to be the governments, right? So they have to invest in that, and that means the taxpayers. But eventually, just like a lot of jobs are now tied to the fossil fuel industry, and we hear all about closing down coal-fired power plants and all the people whose jobs depend on the coal mining, renewable energy will also generate many, many, many jobs. This is an estimate from the Global Renewables Outlook report from 2019, which admittedly is from the International Renewable Energy Agency. But that's a nonprofit, it's not a business. They use global data to estimate job growth, fossil fuel job loss as fossil fuels decline, and renewable job growth as renewables increase. And so there's actually many different jobs that will be created by transitioning to renewables. What are these jobs? Research and development, how to make the all solar, wind, hydro better, more efficient, smaller, more easily repairable. To produce these technologies, to install them, or to convert older systems to retrofit them to these new systems. And then, of course, maintenance. So transitioning to renewables isn't like an economic loss. It's an economic investment that will generate future jobs. And this graphic I put down here is just to show that, the transition will look different in every industry. So some industries are actually going to see some serious change, like aviation, having to use different fuels, like the amount of biofuels it will take to power a plane versus petroleum. It's going to need advances in engineering to do that. But there's a lot of really great minds working on these problems right now. So just like everything else we talk about in this class, and about the topics, just like the topics you're going to look at in your sustainable technologies presentations, These technologies and methods exist to solve many of our sustainable problems or sustainability issues with energy. We just haven't scaled them out. We scaled them up and rolled them out yet at the level that we need to. So that's what we need to move toward in the future. So make sure that you watch that little video about the community solar project at the church. It has some good music in it, and I think it's just a great example of how a community can come together and create accessible, local, renewable energy. Okay, thank you guys. Oh, I forgot, I wanted to just remind you. For Monday, make sure you get your presentation idea to me, and then do your last CPS. So this is your 9th or last CPS, and it's on chapter 16 and 17, which is green buildings and green cities. It's a really cool topic, and I'm looking forward to talking about it with all of you on Monday. Okay, hang in there. Have a good weekend.